Okay, well, we are going to get started. Welcome everyone again to our webinar this afternoon. We have our CTO, Chad Williams, and he's going to be presenting on one of our Copilot series webinars, Understanding Copilot's Role in Data Security and Compliance. As always, we are recording this webinar, and I will get that copy out to everyone after it's over. So be looking for that tomorrow. And we do want interaction, so please put your questions that you have in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, and we will get them addressed. And I will turn it over to Chad to begin the presentation.
All right. Well, thank you, Angie. Yeah, so hello, everyone. I'm Chad Williams. If we haven't met before, I've been with Innovia for over 20 years now. So, um, worn a lot of hats here at Innovia over those years, but really have always kind of stayed close to the technology. And so when Copilot was evolving and coming out, I instantly jumped on it. So I'm happy to hopefully just share and shed a little light on how Microsoft 365 Copilot, how it adheres to data security and compliance. And yeah, just kind of give you a little bit of overview of that. So we'll get started. I'm going to shut my camera off so you don't have to look at me all the way through this. And we'll get going. So, really the way I want to kind of tackle this is to kind of just first give you a little bit of an overview of Microsoft 365 Copilot. This is, I believe, I think we're number 5 in the series here on Copilot. There have been a lot of really great sessions done prior to me. And so if you haven't caught those yet, as Angie said, those are out on the website and go check them out. But yeah, we do a little bit more of a dive in those. So I'm only going to touch the surface here because I really want to give you an idea of, how is Copilot using your data? What is it doing? What data is it using? And then, kind of guide through, how is it then protected? How is your data protected? How is Microsoft meeting the regulatory compliance requirements that it should be doing? And then, kind of finally just wrap up and talk a little bit about Microsoft's commitment to responsible AI, which I think is always a good topic, especially early on in this kind of AI Copilot journey that we're in here, just to kind of help understand what they're doing to kind of keep it safe and fair and ultimately a helpful tool. So again, introducing Microsoft 365 Copilot, simply put, it's just an AI-powered productivity tool, and its goal is simply to help users work more effectively and by generating suggestions and automating a few tasks. It does that by connecting your data with large language models, which are the tools that get the job done. I'm not going to go into all of how AI works today because we simply don't have enough time, but it connects that your data, those large language models with the Microsoft 365 apps, so Word, Excel, PowerPoint, etc. And Microsoft does this, in a manner that provides secure access to all of that data, no different than it already does within your Microsoft 365 tenant, or the way any other app in Microsoft 365 would interact with it. So really what I want to do today is kind of talk through that and show you, talk a little bit about Microsoft's commitment, again, to responsible AI and to making sure that they're meeting those regulatory compliance requirements surrounding data privacy, et cetera. So I should pause because I failed to mention this at the beginning, but Angie kind of touched on it. I don't mind questions. I much would rather be in person with all of you folks and have an interactive discussion about this. But if you do have questions, throw those in the chat and we'll try to pause or Angie can jump in with them. If we get off track, then I might try to save them towards the end, but we should have a few moments at the end too to hit any questions that you have. So then jumping right into it. So first of all, we have to let's talk about what data is being used and how is it being used by Microsoft 365 Copilot. So Microsoft 365 Copilot connects, again, those large language models, the LLMs, to your organizational data. And it does this through Microsoft Graph. If you're not familiar with Microsoft Graph, I'm not going to go into it in any depth here, but it is essentially that gateway to the data within Microsoft 365. So from a technical standpoint, more or less think of it as that API that can be used to interact with that data model. And so it connects that organizational data through Microsoft Graph, and it's accessing both content and context. So content being, documents, emails, et cetera, that are in Microsoft 365. And so that way, the responses that come back are anchored in your data, not general data in the web, not, data somewhere else on somebody else's tenant, your data and your data alone. The context is that it is also providing to the LLMs that context of what are you doing, so it can give you a better response that's more relevant to what you're doing. So are you in a meeting about next month's budget or next year's budget, excuse me, or are you exchanging emails about an issue that you're experiencing with bank rec in Business Central, or is it a chat conversation? So those different things, that context provides that extra dimension, if you will, to the large language models. And then ultimately, hopefully that those responses that come back to you are both accurate, relevant, and then again, they're contextual with what you're doing. They understand with what you are working in. And so, this is a fairly simple slide, but this is really the nuts and bolts of it. I mean, we could get much deeper and probably spend a half a day, but at a high level, this is kind of what's involved. It's your data. As somebody asks a question, your data is accessed through Microsoft Graph, which is secure, and then that context is provided to give those responses. As far as what data is stored, it's really just around those interactions. So that user prompt, when that question they ask, that interactive dialogue that you have with Copilot, the prompt and Copilot's response, along with any other references that it might have made, again, to help ground that response, to ground that data that it's providing to you, that response that it's providing to you in your data. That's the only data that is stored. And it's stored really much like, browser history is stored. So if you've used Copilot, you'll see that it's called a Copilot interaction history. Those interactions make that up. And like you can do with browser history, the users can delete it. As it pertains to how Microsoft processes and stores that data, that is all going to align with the same commitments that Microsoft has made for Microsoft 365. And I'm not talking about just marketing commitments they throw out on a web page. These are the actual contractual commitments that they have made to you as a customer. So the data is encrypted while it's stored. You're going to see this called out a couple of times, and Microsoft kind of makes a point of it, but it's important because I think it's a question that people have been asking since the early days of AI is my data used to train these large language models? And the answer is no. So these interactions that you have, although they are stored, they're not stored to help train the models. They are simply stored as a benefit to the user. If you've worked with Microsoft 365 Copilot, you'll find that depending on the topic, you kind of got to get a little bit of a dialogue going. And again, that helps build that context around what you're looking for, what you're doing. And it's handy to be able to go back to those those prompts that you had. And so that's what you can do in that interaction history, is be able to get back to that. So I really see it as a benefit for the user, but it's important to call out again that these protections are in place around that data and that they're not used beyond that intent. And then, of course, admins can manage that and also set retention policies on that history if they want using Microsoft Purview. So that's really the data. There's not too much more to talk about in terms of that data storage. So that really kind of leads us right into then how does Microsoft protect it? So Microsoft or excuse me, 365 Copilot ensures that the data and the prompts and everything is all again under that umbrella, if you will, of Microsoft 365. So again, first of all, that first thing to call out here again, prompts, responses, and data are not used to train LLMs, those large language models. So the questions you ask, the responses you get, your underlying data, none of that, none zero zip is used to train those models. So what data does it surface? So if I'm a user and I'm in Copilot and I ask it for something, what's it going to surface, on my network? Let's say I was, looking for some information about last year's sales or something like that. It's only going to reference information that I, as a user, have permission to. So all of the permissions that are already in place within your Microsoft 365 tenant are going to apply. So I have to have at least view permission to a file for it to be referenced. So if there's, if I have a question, if I tried to ask a question about something I don't have permission to, I'm not going to get access to something I didn't already have access to. So Copilot is not going to be kind of a backdoor or a roundabout way for your employees to get to information that they don't have access to. Now, with that said, it is very important that you adhere to Microsoft's best practices and recommendations as it relates to permission and security setup within your Microsoft 365 tenant. And so ensuring that the right users and the right groups have the right permissions to access the important things. So when we first started down this journey, this was one of the early questions that we had was, questions, really concerns, I suppose, in that, before Copilot, it is possible, obviously, that a file ends up right where it shouldn't be. A user inadvertently saves it someplace where, multiple people have access, and it's not where it really belongs. And so before Copilot, there's some security in the fact that, odds are most people aren't going to run across that file. Now, it shouldn't be there without a question, but, the chances that somebody stumbled upon it were relatively slim. Now, in the Copilot world, the thing to keep in mind that if you feel like you have files that are sitting maybe where people that you don't want to access them have access to them, but you think they're, they don't know them, they're there, they don't even know that folder exists there, so they're never going to see it. Well, Copilot is obviously going to have the ability to search all of that, and if that document contains information that relates to that prompt, the questions that user asked, it could surface that data. So again, it just speaks to the importance of adhering to those best practices. And there's other technologies out there that you can use within Microsoft 365 to ensure sensitivity labels and other things that help ensure that files don't end up where they shouldn't. So certainly look into those. I don't have time to dive into that today, but again, it's just important to note that if you have stuff sitting where it shouldn't be, you may need to clean that up before you start to deploy Copilot. It's important to note that those, again, the prompts, the data, the responses, all of that, it all stays within your 365 tenant, within that Microsoft 365 service. It's not going out somewhere else. It's not being shipped someplace you don't expect it to. It's staying all within that Microsoft ecosystem, no different than any other data that you have in 365. And because of that, it can then obviously adhere to the privacy, security, and compliance commitments that Microsoft has already made. And one last important note to make here is that so Microsoft utilizes their Azure OpenAI services, which are within that 365 service boundary. Your data is not getting shipped out to OpenAI's publicly available services. So it's all staying within, the Microsoft cloud, I guess, really simply put. And because it does, that whole security structure that comes along with Microsoft 365 applies to Copilot. So your access controls like MFA, isolated instances. So ensuring that your data remains your data in these multi-tenant cloud environments, that your data is encrypted, any compliance boundaries that exist are being followed. Again, that data remains in Microsoft 365. Your data is not in any form, any way, anyhow used in training. Of course, you have to still mention responsible AI in this, and we will dive deeper into it in a few minutes. But then also all of the other security measures that any our IT folks and anybody that works and administers Microsoft 365 is familiar with, they all pertain. Copilot is not a separate thing. It is not a separate app. It is not a separate, well, it is not a back door to your data. It is not a back door where people can get in or a back door where things leak out. It is just another app really within that Microsoft 365 ecosystem, no different than Word or Excel or any of the other apps that Microsoft continues to develop and release. So it's all within that universe. So it really, in a way, it kind of makes the whole discussion much simpler in that it is Microsoft 365, and no different than your data in SharePoint, it is protected. But because it's AI, there are other things to consider, and so such as abuse monitoring, so to make sure that the service is being used as it is intended. This is done real time, which allows, which prohibits any kind of standing access that Microsoft would have to your data to kind of check it, either human or automated kind of review of it after the fact. So it's done real time during these interactions with Copilot. Of course, as with any Microsoft product, customer feedback is an important part of that, and like all others, it's also optional, but it can be used to improve Microsoft 365 Copilot. And the feedback is not directly used to train models. Again, so you kind of hear this theme over and over again. It's very important how the models are being trained, and that due to for data privacy concerns, that your data isn't directly used. And so this feedback is no different. Now, indirectly, it may have influence on how Copilot works, right? That's the whole point of feedback, but it's not going to directly be used to train those models. And then, of course, as customers, you can manage that through the admin controls. As I mentioned earlier, it's using Azure OpenAI services. So Azure OpenAI services uses content filtering to block harmful content, which is another important aspect of AI, to make sure that these different things such as hate, fairness, sexual content, violence, and self-harm are not injected into what is influencing or building these responses from Copilot. So Azure OpenAI Service has those technologies in place to block those things, to ensure equitable treatment, and to really block that language that's related to harm or discrimination. Along with that, you also have what's called prompt injections or jailbreak attacks. So these are situations where the user is prompting Copilot and really trying to, get it to misbehave, get it to do something it shouldn't be doing. And so Copilot has a defense mechanism for this that's designed to, catch these kind of injection attacks that exist. Unfortunately, as we see in the regular security world, whether it's email spam, calls, etc. There's always these malicious attacks that are attempted, and so Copilot and Azure AI Content Services have these things built in to help prevent them. Kind of starting to steer a little bit towards data residency and regulatory requirements. So Microsoft Copilot 365 adheres to those data residency commitments that it has made. Really, as of March 1st, that became part of that, and works with different offerings like advanced data residency and multi-geo capabilities, excuse me, as well as the EU data service boundary. So if you are an EU customer, your data stays within that data service boundary. Non-EU customers, queries, et cetera, may go outside of your region, but again, keep in mind, this is still all within the Microsoft Cloud, all within that Microsoft 365 data boundary. Looking at those regulatory requirements, Microsoft is committed to this. This is an evolving space. This AI space is changing very quickly. And so it's important that Microsoft 365 Copilot adheres to data privacy. Where's your data used? How is it used? Transparency, how are these technologies being developed is important. And so Microsoft provides transparency into that. Much of this stuff is out on GitHub, where you could go out and read and learn more about how these things are built. Fairness in making sure that different biases and things aren't being injected into these language models that might skew their responses in an unfair direction. And then, of course, accountability through open dialogue with customers, et cetera, to make sure that we understand, how this technology is built. I mean, this should not be, it should not be a black box, and it shouldn't be treated like a black box where, it's smoke and mirrors and we don't know what's happening. So Microsoft is committed to that and sharing what they're doing and how they're doing it. And then finally, Microsoft's commitment to responsible AI. So Microsoft has been guided by these principles and standards that they started to, well, they've been developed over decades of research, but really since 2017, this has led their focus. And these guidelines and standards are really geared towards prioritizing people and making sure that we're building responsible, ethical AI that is there to help and assist people, not deceive and do other malicious things. All of their systems, all of their AI systems are reviewed by different teams regularly to check for harms and different things that might be put out there. There's, in terms of mitigating the risk of different things getting injected, they're constantly refining the data that is used to train the model, which does not include your data. And then filtering out that harmful content. Again, anything that might bias it. There's technologies out there that are called Interpret ML and Fairlane, for example, that have the ability to detect and correct this data bias. So they utilize those as well. And then in terms of transparency, noting the limitations. It's not 100% this is fact, believe it and move on. It's it's being clear about where did this data come from, linking to sources, and making sure that users understand that they should review and fact check what they're getting out of Copilot. And then the last aspect of that is really the support and resources that Microsoft provides. So there is a ton of information out there about its intended uses, its capabilities, and then even more importantly, its limitations. So what can it do? What can it do? Providing that transparency to guide users. So then to kind of wrap up here already, I hope, this is a short presentation, but I hope that this kind of just gives you a little bit of peace of mind and just help you see like how this is architected. So 365 Copilot is simply part of Microsoft 365. And because it's going to align with all of the commitments that Microsoft has already made to you as a customer, in terms of how is your data going to be used? How is it secured? How is that privacy maintained? And then of course, all of the compliancy obligations that go with that. On top of it, It's utilizing the permissions that you have in place. So you do not need to be concerned that this is giving your employees, your users, access to something you don't want them to. Again, assuming you have set up security the way you should to prevent that. And at the end of the day, it's all about then providing that personalized response back to that user and helping them. I can tell you firsthand from my experience in it now for a few months now, it's unbelievable the different things that it can do. I almost have more fun just throwing a challenge at it just to see how it will do. So I hope today shared a little bit of light on how the data is protected and secured. And certainly if you have other questions or things that you would like to review, I'm happy to discuss. You got my email here. But again, we just really want to encourage you to look further at this technology. And if security is a question in your mind, hopefully I've shed a little bit of light on it, and certainly would love to chat further with you on it. So Angie, I apologize, I did not pause for questions, but we do hopefully have a few minutes here now. So I'll hand it back to you.
Okay, thank you, Chad. No questions have come through yet, but if anybody does have any, please get those into the Q&A box and we can get them addressed. Chad, while we're waiting for any last minute responses, anything you want to add to wrap up?
Um, no, again, I think there's a lot of information that I could cover, and trying to fit this into 25 minutes, about 25 minutes is a bit tough, but I hope also that you can just see like it. Again, I just can't stop. I can't overemphasize the fact that, again, this is all just part of Microsoft 365. And don't turn a blind eye, but also you have trust in that already today, and the security that's provided there. And so this isn't, again, it's not a backdoor to your data. So I hope that if you're on the fence about Copilot and security is one of those things that are bothering you, I hope this just helps kind of start you down that path to understand, how it's used, how it's involved, because it really is a powerful tool that can assist your employees.
Okay, well, no questions have come through. Like I mentioned, I am going to be sending the recording out to everyone. So perhaps if you want to review it and if any questions come up, please feel free to reach out to Chad and he'll be happy to address your questions. Thank you again, Chad, for the presentation, and thank you to everyone who has attended, or if you're watching this on demand, we thank you for taking the time out to join us. And if you check out our resource page on our website, you can access all of the available Business Central content that we have. I put that link in the chat for you. And be sure to take our survey at the end of the webinar. Your responses will help us with future material and improvement. And for those that are attending Summit next month, perhaps we will see you there. So be looking for us and get together and stop by our booth, number 239. And again, just thank you again for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you soon at another Anovia webinar. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chad.
Thank you, everyone.